Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Patrick O'Boyle, is the GRC lead at Rogo. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pete.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career?
Yeah, no problem. So I am the GRC lead at a vertical AI company. I have about 14 years of experience in GRC specifically, but I've covered investment banking, healthcare, technology startups. So it's been a great ride. I love GRC. I love talking GRC, so really happy to be here.
Very cool. So I'd imagine those are very different industries, obviously. Have you noticed that hiring has changed at all among all the different industries?
Yeah, I would say, I think the trend in hiring has been pretty much the same across a lot of those industries. I think, maybe there's been some hiring decreases in crypto, but I think that that's kind of across the board. So it's not really a GRC issue per se.
Yeah, ebbs and flows for sure. It's been a while, I would say 5 years or so in GRC hiring as I've been monitoring it. I think increase in automation and the compliance platforms coming to the fore has had a massive impact on hiring at the traditional consulting firms, and a whole new crop of companies being created. I guess, what about the talent gap overall? Do you think there is such a thing as a talent gap in security and I guess more specifically GRC?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest um, kind of gap that there maybe exists for GRC is folks that kind of can see where GRC is heading to in terms of automation, using centralized tools versus folks that are using spreadsheets, doing a lot of manual work. So I think that that's kind of the delta between the two GRC professionals, per se. And I think that that really just comes down to just some of the opportunities that GRC folks have gotten while they're working, right? So some places are pretty supportive of pushing the envelope, trying to get automation, trying to get tools, and some places might be more of hey, listen, be happy with your spreadsheets. This is more audit support. I think that, like, for professionals to kind of make that leap, um, there's not so much that they need to learn in terms of frameworks. I think as a whole, we're really good with knowing what auditors are looking for, what regulators are looking for, what compliance professionals are looking for. I think that that gap really just exists in trying to implement ways that these things can be conducted a little bit more efficiently. So, for instance, like capturing evidence in a automated manner, right? So that's kind of like my feeling of like where there's like a gap.
Yeah, fair enough. Are there specific skill sets that you think people may be lacking when it comes to automation and building more of these systems that are less manual? Is it coding knowledge that people need to gain if they want to upskill, or is it more process orientation? If there are any, if candidates are lacking in any areas or particular skill sets, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, I think probably implementing the automation. Um, if this was 5 years ago, I would say definitely like coding ability. But I think a lot of the generative AI tools, such as Claude Code or Codex by OpenAI, have kind of democratized those coding skills to the point where if you're able to troubleshoot, you can get really far. So, do you still need to know Python and the IDE? I think probably, but there's so many free resources out there. You could probably find, 10,000 free YouTube videos, and maybe spend like a half hour to maybe a couple hours learning about, the command line, some of the functions in Python, how it works. And then, you can move to a coding tool such as Claude Code. And you can kind of build some of these automation tools. I think the best analogy to what it kind of is, when YouTube first came out, we were all watching stuff on TV or streaming. And then YouTube came out, and then anybody who had a laptop that had a camera and a mic could upload content, create their own TV shows. And now, if you look back in it, it's a huge, multi-billion-dollar industry that's really just, people talking in front of a camera and then uploading it to YouTube. So I think the same thing is kind of happening with coding right now. So as long as you're familiar enough to troubleshoot in case issues arise, you could use those tools that I mentioned, and you can, start to automate some of the stuff that you want to automate. And you could do it on your personal computer. So if you don't have approval at work to use it, you can kind of play around with it. And you could kind of start to learn some of the fundamentals for how it would work, right? So I think a good example for this is, I did a project where there is like I take the train to work, and I wanted to have it be like a desktop widget. And I just wanted the desktop widget to tell me when the next train would arrive. So I plugged that into Claude Code, I troubleshooted it, and I was able to actually get that widget. And so that experience, then I was able to kind of parlay into actually automating some things at work, right? So granted, it was like a couple of years from the widget to doing automation at work, but that's like kind of how my journey was. And so some of the things that we were able to automate, it's really as simple as having an agent parse through a PDF. That could be a SOC 2, right? And then basically parse through it and then tell you things about that document that you've uploaded. So, what are the services that are part of that SOC 2? What are the controls that were assessed? Were there any exceptions that were found? This is like pretty simple stuff. But like 10 years ago, that would be, kind of magic. But going back to that train example, right? Like it really is the same thing as it's looking at the train schedule. It's looking at the real-time data from, for my area, Metro North, and then basically putting the two together and saying, oh, well, the nearest train is going to be like 5 minutes away, and it's express train. So yeah, that's like kind of, hopefully that helps everyone, but that's kind of like a quick, like 10-minute, how I would upskill to kind of be ready for more automation if I was in a place that, what isn't really allowing me to experiment with that automation.
That's great. Well, and it almost strikes me as similar to what basically entry-level SOC analysts were being told to do this entire time, trying to break into the field. It's you have to tinker, you have to have a home lab, you have to just be experimenting constantly. But I don't think GRC folks really had that pressure, because it's like once you knew the frameworks, there was already some infrastructure in place for you to manage all the work. And you just had to kind of execute on individual tasks and not think so much about architecture and process and all of these more complicated, aspects of the job. What do you think is the future of automation in GRC? Is it the VC-backed platforms like, Vanta and Drata, or is it more of these homegrown solutions that folks are kind of coming up with just in their day job?
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't have the best answer for it, because I think the answer is if you can automate it in any fashion that, you're going to get budget for, and what makes the most sense, you should take that, right? So the reason why I do say that is because I do think that with more autonomous systems, we're going to have more governable service area. So, a really great example of this is AI agents, right? There's a lot of different ways that agent orchestration happens, but For folks who may not be familiar, like a AI agent is basically, we had ChatGPT that was a chatbot. It'd say, hey, ChatGPT, like, can you make me a cool peanut butter and jelly recipe? And it would be like, oh, maybe put a banana in it, right? Like that was like the genesis of what it was like, 3 or 4 years ago. But now, the systems are more sophisticated, and so they can do what's called a tool call, which means that they can call maybe a scripting language like Python, or maybe they can search the web. And so they can start to bring in more things so that the output that they give you is a little bit better than, hey, oh, just throw a banana on a PB and jelly sandwich. So for AI agents, um, part of what will also happen is that AI agent will then spin up other agents. So if you give it a task that is more complex, it will spin up agents that may be dedicated to doing specific parts of that task, right? So if you think of like a car, right? Not that AI is going to build a car, right? But if you're like, hey, build a car, there would be an agent that would be maybe focused on the engine. There would be an agent that's maybe focused on, a wheel and tires. Maybe the infotainment system, right? So it's going to break it down into, smaller steps. There's other types of model, or there's other types of agent orchestration. But, for all intents and purposes, that's a great way to understand it. But that creates more surface area that needs to be governed, right? So whether that's observability, whether that is making sure that one of those agents doesn't become misaligned, and then, it's working on a wheel, but now all of a sudden it thinks it's working on an ice cream cone, right? Like that would be an example of misalignment. So yeah, there's a lot more that I think we're gonna have to do. You could make the case, well, can't an AI agent do that part as well? Maybe, right? But that is going to be a significant expansion of like the current GRC remit. So I think if you're not automating or thinking about automating now, maybe in 2 to 5 years, some of these more compliance bodies or regulatory bodies may have more things that they require a GRC professional to know and to do. And if you're not automating, it's going to be an uphill battle for you to do those expanded tasks. And so, if maybe in 2 to 5 years is the expanded scope, maybe you may get budget for automation, and it's going to be an uphill battle for you to move to that automation while trying to keep the lights on as well. So I think like now is a good time to think about it because there's no expanded scope. You can do what you're doing now, keep the lights on, but then also, move to maybe a new system. But again, it's going to be really hard if there's an expanded scope and you have to do a migration from like a spreadsheet to a centralized GRC system.
Yeah, boy, it's interesting. As you were speaking about the car analogy, I got to thinking, boy, it's going to be really difficult to do root cause analysis if something goes wrong. If you have, agents managing agents on all of these different individual tasks, how do you trace causality when there's a problem? Like that seems to me to be a very granular problem that would require some poring through, almost like digital forensics, where you're trying to trace the paths of things. And I could see that being, very labor intensive. And I know we had talked about that off air before, where a lot of these tasks are now being automated away that traditionally GRC folks would have done. But I think you're making the argument that, well, there's a whole new slew of tasks that are going to be created. And, it seems like the bar keeps getting raised, though, and the tasks that humans will continue to do or will do in the future are getting more and more complex to where, the barrier to entry is much higher to be able to complete those tasks and make those decisions. It strikes me that you would need to have certain intangible properties or traits, or I don't know if it's a personality thing or an intelligence thing. Like, what does the future GRC professional look like? Like, what traits would you say they need to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point, Pete, and also I think like those those are great questions because I think that our current controls are a little inadequate for these situations. So, in terms of like what traits will a GRC professional need in the future, I kind of think that with a lot of this stuff, not only in like GRC but in life, right? Like, I think it will be everything kinda turned up to 12, right? So, if you're a little curious now, if you're like, "Oh, I wonder how that works," you'll probably need to expand that, by a lot, because you're gonna need to be more curious about, how these systems are working, and from a GRC perspective, I think we're really well positioned for that because we're curious. We want to know how it works, but then we want to know, okay, what does this mean in terms of risk and control, right? Like, does this map to any of our existing risk frameworks? Is this like a new risk or a novel risk? And then also, what are like the controls that I need to have in place to drive down that inherent risk so it's a more manageable residual risk. So I think definitely the more curious you are, the better this is going to translate to, maybe a newer world. Um, I think also just trying to learn as much. I know that's very easy and I fall, I definitely fall into the same trap as like, all right, there's like been a revision to NIST or, hey, we have the AI NIST framework. There's a lot on it that leverages the existing NIST, right? Um, but I think going outside of the domain, trying to learn, maybe how you would implement RBAC, right? Like trying to become a little bit more technical. And that's not to say that you need to like do, zeros and ones and machine language and, get super technical. But I think just being comfortable, having those conversations, I think that will help a lot. And also, I think, you know, problems will happen. So being able to kind of troubleshoot those problems as they arise, everything that I've kind of covered will help you become better positioned to kind of work through those problems.
It's an interesting point about kind of doubling down on your strengths. It's something I think about in recruiting as well. As the automation gets better and better, what's the real role of a recruiter? If the automation is able to source better than an average sourcer, and it's able to schedule interviews without human intervention, what's left? It's what the humans were really good at in the first place, the high leverage activities that really only humans can do well. And it's that human interaction piece. It's the curiosity. It's the asking questions. It's the emotional intelligence. All of these things that are not simple tasks. They're much more complex than that, and requires a deep general intelligence, not very narrow, specific intelligence. Well, I guess narrow in a way, like to be a very emotionally perceptive, that's a pretty narrow thing, and it can go pretty deep. But also combining that with other factors that make you, a good recruiter. So
I
I
think
love that.
those are great points because like we're sort of seeing that those efficiency gains that we're getting through this automation are offsetting because there's more work that's happening, right? So it's like we're getting really good at automation, but that's also, other teams are using these same tools, right? And that's creating more work that has to happen. And I think of there's a recent Harvard study where they tracked a kind of an AI native organization. So this was an organization that was started pretty recently. Everyone there was very used to using AI type tools. And what they found is that the people that were working there were actually burning out much faster. And the reason why they were burning out much faster was because they were working more So it kind of goes back to your point, like the tools are letting you accomplish more, but that's also making you want to do more because you're like, oh, well, I'm actually getting things done. Let's see how much more I can get done. And then that kind of balloons into working on Saturdays and Sundays and maybe late nights because you're finding that, oh, these tools are working. I can get more done. I can put more, I can have a bigger remit. I can have more responsibilities. And so this study really found that folks were kind of agreeing to too much. And then they got to a point where they're like, oh my goodness, I'm doing so many things. I'm responsible for so many things. Like, am I dropping the ball? I'm working too much. And then, these folks burn out. So, yeah, I think maybe there's like a little bit of pessimism, but I definitely think like to my, original point and your point too, Pete, like the efficiency gains aren't offsetting the amount of work that folks are having because they're using these tools effectively.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people would make the argument that work is not finite. You
Yeah.
can always do more, and especially from a business perspective, that's what you want. All else equal, in a vacuum, you want more productivity, and so you're going to encourage your employees to be more productive. But at what point does it start to become counterproductive, where people are getting burnt out and leaving, and attrition is expensive as well. So what about the hiring side? How do we hire for and manage a workforce where there's essentially an infinite amount that you can get done? How do we ensure that people are staying balanced?
Yeah, I think that's kind of my thesis of why, in the long term, there will be more openings for this for GRC. I think a lot of what we're seeing maybe is like a reaction to, a lot of the hiring booms post COVID. So it's kind of like a pendulum. I think the pendulum swung one way during that season, and now unfortunately it may be swinging the other way. But I think long term, right? Do you make sure that people don't burn out by expanding the teams, right? Letting people work out what they want to be responsible for and what, other folks may be, better positioned to be responsible for. I think, having those shared responsibilities, ensuring that people are not burning themselves out, taking vacations. Maybe we get rid of, some of these like, uh, no vacation benefits, right? Or like any vacation you want benefits, right? There's no, you don't accrue vacation time. It's just when you want to take it off. I think a lot of those benefits that we've seen in the market don't mean that everyone gets to take off when they want to take off. It really means that you have a few that take a lot of time off, and then you have most people who like feel like, oh, I have to, I have to be at work, I have to be accountable, I have to get my things done. Whereas like, traditionally, like your boss came to you was like, hey, Patrick, like you have 15 days of vacation and you're going to lose it at the end of the year. Like you need to take time off, right? Like I think those are things that we've done in the past that were really effective at managing burnout. I also think in the past we had bigger teams, so that's why I do think like hiring is will probably increase in the long term. But I think also business owners kind of have to look at some of the benefits that they were offering maybe post COVID and make sure that that actually is being used, and is actually being used in a manner that makes sure that people are getting actual rest and not burning themselves out.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of benefits packages over the years, having worked with so many hiring managers. And I can tell you the people that were the most happy generally had a set amount of PTO. They knew
Yeah.
when they could actually take it. And studies back that up. I forget what research I had read, but people take less time off with unlimited plans. Um, but they know what expectations are. So they're not stressing about not meeting expectations. And that level of psychological comfort goes a long way. And having a hiring manager too that actually cares and is staying close to their people. Even just a quarterly check-in, or just a weekly meeting. How's everybody's week been? Like, I don't think everything needs to be a meeting, but I think you need to have some time with your people to understand where their head's at, and have built enough trust up until that point to where they feel comfortable actually saying if something is wrong. Which I guess kind of goes to the idea of culture. How would you define a culture, and like, what makes a good one, do you think?
Yeah, I think for having a shared culture where everyone has kind of bought into what the mission is. It sounds super cheesy. I think everyone's like heard that answer before. But I think it is really real. I'm a big fan of biographies. I read a lot of them. And that's kind of what comes up most of the time is, when people feel that they are working on something really important and they feel like everyone is, working with the same intensity that they are, you have a really great culture. A culture where everyone is like not really bought in, or, you know, it's important, but maybe it's not that important. It's hard to really motivate folks to, kind of work hard. So I think I had a mentor who, told me one time that, if a company is paying a lot of money and it's the most money you've ever seen for that role, you might need to step back and think about, is there a reason why they're paying that much? And most of the time it's because maybe what they're working on is not as exciting, or is hard to buy into, than other organizations. So that's something that I think a lot of people think about. I certainly do, but I think working on important things, working on hard problems, and everyone is working on the same, with the same intensity is kind of what I think makes a great culture.
That's a great point. Well, and I never thought about the same level of intensity thing before. But yeah, if you have a massive disparity between the amount of work or the quality of work that a couple of people on the team are doing, there's always going to be some resentment there, because the high performers will look at the low performers and say, well, they're not pulling their weight. I'm carrying everybody on my back. What's going on? So that's a good point too, is just managing performance and making sure that people are on the same page, that they have common goals, and that they're not competing against each other. That can be another thing too. Comparison being the thief of joy. People feeling jealous and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think often you can get a sense for that just by being close enough to your team, but you have to understand the people that are working for you. And I think a lot of that goes back to hiring the right people in the first place. Because once you get somebody on board, it's much harder to let them go,
Yeah,
especially in the modern
100%.
environment. So how do you select for the right people on your team? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's something I think about a lot as well. What I'll give a good answer and then I'll give a trap that I think a lot of people fall into. So one, it's just trying to hire, I mean, it's a corny answer, but trying to hire the best possible person, right? It's easier said than done. I think everyone, starts a hiring process and they're like, I'm going to hire the best possible person. But, having that mindset throughout the entire process, is what gets you to actually hire the best possible person. So, as you go through these hiring cycles, you might look at the amount of work that you have to do 6 months from now, or you might see like a business expansion, or you might see like a feature release, or you might see like a merger, right? And you're like, oh man, there's going to be a lot of work. So that is kind of like this trap that I think a lot of folks will fall into, where they'll say, well, this person was good, but they weren't the best. But at the same time, I have so much work that's going to come up. I really need to hire this person. Um, I think that does a disservice to you, but it also does a disservice to the candidate as well. You want to make sure that everybody on your team you think is the best possible person because you're going to treat them like they're the best possible person. That builds camaraderie, it builds trust, it builds a great working culture. If you've already kind of made exceptions or you've had like this conversation in your head during that hiring process, you've kind of lost that battle. And you might think, well, after I hire that person, like they'll, have on the job training or, maybe their personality will shift and they'll be like the best possible fit. Those thoughts that you have may come up, 6 to 8 months down the road. And then, they're on your team, right? And it's actually not really fair to them because you're having, those kind of doubts. So, I think you should be really bought in to everyone on your team being who you think is the best. And also too, a lot of folks will learn on the job, right? They'll pick up new skills. Um, but if you're in a hiring process and you're like, this person is the best possible person, you have that expectation that they're also going to learn, right? So it's not really changing your perspective about who to hire. You already are bought in that they're going to learn these new skills. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. I think it's also, like I said, like the most fair, because, you want people that think that you're the best possible person on your team.
Yeah, well, and your enthusiasm as a hiring team comes across to the candidate because people aren't stupid, and
100%.
they will
Yeah.
know if it seems like it's a little iffy, and they'll often mention that to the recruiter. Well, I wasn't sure, if they really liked me or not. I couldn't get a good read. If you
Yeah.
if you can get a good read on somebody, it's pretty clear what if they like you. So anytime I hear that, I know it probably didn't go very well, and inevitably when I check in with the hiring manager, that was the case. Um, but so it strikes me as like you want to be excited about the person. I think depending on the role, best looks different, obviously, for each individual role.
100%.
Um, but like, how do you ensure that you're not being too picky, I guess, on the hiring side, in your assessment of the best possible person? Like, I see so many job descriptions nowadays that are a
Yeah.
mile long, and they're like 4 different skill sets. How do you ensure that you're not erring on that side too much?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm really glad that you mentioned the super long JD that, the person needs to be, a firefighter, an EMT, and a rocket scientist at the same time. It's just not going to happen, right? So I think that you are fair and equitable by having a very narrow JD. That's what the work that you are trying to get done is, right? So, roles expand over time. That's kind of the norm. That's how these things work. Don't write your JD for what you think that role is going to look like in 12 to 18 months. It just doesn't make sense. Like, write the role for what is needed now. And then that gives you a narrow criteria of skills that you can evaluate for. So I think you should get the best possible person. So I think that it's not the question of like being too picky. I think it's making sure that your criteria is the same, for everyone that you're looking at. It's very narrow. These are questions that you can answer pretty decisively, right? Like, does this person have this skill? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Um, maybe also too, like, something that I've thought about is like low ego, right? If you have a lot on your plate, your team runs lean. Um, you need to make sure that if someone corrects you or somebody gives you feedback or somebody gives you maybe some constructive feedback, that person's going to say, oh, okay, like that sounds like that's the best way to do this, or um, totally hear you. Like, let's get this done, right? Like that will also help a lot of this team cohesion. And that's not to say that you know, like you have all the answers, right? Like I don't think anyone has the answers, right? But also like if you have low ego, somebody on your team can come to you and say like, hey, the way we're doing this is not correct. Like there's a better way to do this. And so if you yourself are low ego and your entire team is low ego, that means that you can also get that constructive feedback and say, okay, like that's awesome. Like let's do it, this new and novel way and see if it works.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned ego because I think often when any single person has an ego, it's almost like putting up walls or dividers between people. There was a COO that I had worked with for a DFIR consulting firm a while back. And one of his major mandates or goals for himself was to tear down silos to where every team was working with every other team and there weren't egos among the team so that everybody felt comfortable collaborating. And he did a great job of that. And they had so much better retention once they had, I hate to say it, but ousted some of the more toxic members of the team and got more low ego folks on board. But you also make a great point about having a narrow set of what good looks like when you're hiring. That's one of the things that I think so many companies do wrong. And often what ends up happening, especially if you have a lot of interviewers, is you'll have possibly a pretty well-defined role and like narrow list of requirements, but then you'll have 6 or 7 people involved in the interview process, and maybe they're all looking for different things that aren't on that job description. That's how you end up getting 21, 40 candidates through the interview process and not actually making a hire. And then time too.
Exactly.
Folks will move on if you're, spending six weeks, for instance, on an interview process, for sure. So, yeah. Anything else we could be doing better as an industry on the hiring side?
Um, I, I do think like this. I think you made such a great point with folks on the SOC. How we told them to do like a home lab. I know we kind of like covered it, but like I really want to like drive that point home. Like I think that by listening to like a podcast like this, you are probably one of the folks that are the most receptive to those messages of like learning, maybe playing around with the tools yourself, having this like home lab, right, which looks very different from what we would say to a SOC analyst. But I think that that's kind of where we can mature, where we can bring value, especially to a lot of organizations that maybe tried some of these technologies a couple of years ago, and it didn't work out. The functionalities is a lot different. So something that I always kind of bring up to folks is, if you tried that like Gmail, write my email 2 years ago, it was awful. It makes sense. It was just super bad. And now if you try it, it's very good. So a lot has changed. And if you are, experimenting with these tools, doing the homework, trying to be, lifelong learner, you're going to be really well positioned. Not just with this role, but also, to helping a organization to change. And I think a lot of organizations do want to change. So yeah, I kind of just want to emphasize that point.
No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think adaptability is one of those things that's a trait that we'll continue to need to have, maybe more so moving forward with all the automation and everything. Curiosity, passion for learning. It seems like a lot almost, I think, to some folks that they just kind of want to, put in their hours and go home at the end of the day.
100%.
But that's you almost can't anymore, it seems like, in security. I mean, security has always been a field that evolved very quickly, but now with AI, it's almost been supercharged to the point where if you even want to hope to stay on top of everything, you have to be constantly iterating and learning, and it helps to be genuinely curious. Otherwise, you're not going to want to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
You have to have something deeper driving you, I guess.
And I think, like I said before, like if you're listening to a podcast like this, like you're not one of those folks who's just like plugging in, logging off, right? Like you have a genuine curiosity for the field, and so it seems like maybe that's like everyone else, but I promise you that that is actually like a very small subset. So that is really like a value add and also a differentiator. But yeah, to your point too, like I think things are changing so much that if you're waiting for, a news publication to pick it up, or if you're not really paying attention, a lot of things are happening in the background that's not really having a lot of focus on it. So if you're able to play around with these tools, right, you'll be able to see a lot of the stuff that's happening and changing very quickly. Also, like a something that I always recommend is, um, if you want to play around with Claude Code, sign up for it, and then you can go in and you can cancel it. So, you don't get charged if you like forget to unsubscribe. Like that's something that I always kind of do whenever I want to do like experimentation, is I just kind of take away the risk that I might forget to, unsubscribe, or I might forget to pay for the next month, right? And then I can see within that trial period, or maybe that 1 month that I purchased, do I like this? Is this something that I can see myself doing? And then if I don't, like, you just don't continue. And that's another thing too. Like, if something doesn't seem interesting to you, or you're not having fun, I would just say don't try and force it, right? Like, maybe there's other things that you may be interested in, right? But if it's not fun, it's going to be hard to find that fun, you know, maybe a couple of years down the road, right? It's not a lot's going to change. It is what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point about finding what's fun for you. And as you were talking there, I was thinking, it seems like you have to know so much, or there's so much to know. It's impossible to know everything about
100%.
automation or AI or whatever. Like you have to pick a lane, I guess, at some point and tinker a little bit. But like you don't necessarily want to stress constantly about it. You just want to do a little bit all the time, essentially. It's like, myself, I'm interested in this stuff, experimenting and how I could use AI for recruiting. And I'm trying out some new tools right now, but I'm not doing 15 demos a week
Yeah,
either.
100%.
It's like you tinker here and there and find what works for you, and don't try to force it if it doesn't seem like it's a good fit for you. So yeah, I love that.
I think that last piece is what's so big now, is there is so much and it feels very overwhelming. But on the other side of it, I think you really made a great point. Is like, if you do the demo and it doesn't work, or you don't like it, there's 10 other tools that you could look at, right? So don't like waste time with the one that you did the demo with, or the one that you saw on social media. Don't force it, right? And also too, like, I think life is about having fun, and that doesn't mean like in terms of like a hedonistic whatever. You should just be passionate about what you talk to. I think it comes through when you're talking with other folks. So if you're talking about something and you're not passionate about it, right? Maybe reevaluate, see if there's some part that you are passionate about. And I think GRC too has a ton of different facets, right? Like you may not be passionate about auditing, but talking about risk and control is something that you really enjoy, or that seems intellectually stimulating to you. Like maybe shift over to that. Try to talk to folks in the industry. Like, how do I get more into the risk and control side? So like there's a lot of things that you can do within GRC. Don't get bogged down or stuck in something that you just don't find interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And try and find your niche, basically. Find what makes sense to you and then
Yeah.
double down on that. I think it was Warren Buffett said something about that. But yeah, to try to force something that you're not passionate about, other people can see that. And it's not doing really anybody any good if
Yeah,
you're trying to force
exactly.
something. Well, it's the same thing on the hiring side. Like if there's a candidate that you're not passionate about, again, they can feel it.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If somebody's interviewing with a company and they're just not feeling it, they're not going to be enthusiastic in the interview. There's no point in saying, well, yeah, I'll accept the offer because the money is good, because you're going to be miserable in the long run. To your point from earlier. We're actually out of time. So last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think just, don't run too lean, right? Like I think especially with what we kind of covered today, there's going to be a lot more work coming down the pipe. So don't think that yet just because I have a team of, 3 or 4 individuals, I'm going to be able to cover, what's coming in the future. Just if you can make the case for it, and I think there's a really good case to be made, I would do it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've certainly seen an uptick in the number of jobs that are essentially one-person GRC departments, for instance. So that seems to be more and more common. But yeah, maybe as the industry gets its head around automation and, hey, we're actually going to have a whole new set of tasks to complete and decisions to make, we're going to need more people. But only way to do that is to experiment, I suppose. So
For sure.
Great point, Patrick. People want to reach out to you. What's the best way to do so?
Yeah, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm definitely always happy to meet like-minded professionals.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Patrick, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Bye.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.